Every time the price tag rises, even by a few cents, your life becomes a little harder, even if you don't notice it right away. Groceries, rent, medicine, transportation. Every bill creeps upward like a shadow growing longer at sunset. And if you've ever looked at your salary and wondered why it feels smaller even when the number hasn't changed, you're not mistaken. Something is being stolen from you quietly, slowly, and legally. You are living inside the largest silent wealth transfer in human history, one that repeats itself generation after generation. Not with war, not with guns, not with revolutions, but with mathematics. Because inflation doesn't just raise prices, it erases the future of anyone who doesn't own the system. Welcome to the modern financial world, where money isn't just paper, it's power. Where the cost of living becomes the cost of freedom. Where one group sees chaos and panic, and another sees opportunity and profit. Because to the average person, inflation feels like the world spinning out of control. Bills rising faster than wages, rent that eats paychecks, savings accounts that shrink while you sleep. But to the powerful, inflation is not chaos, it's a tool. It is order. It is strategy. It is the heartbeat that keeps a debt-based system alive. Inflation is how governments wage war without raising taxes. It is how big corporations erase their mountains of debt. It is how the wealthy multiply their assets while everyone else fights just to stay where they are. So the real question was never, why is there inflation? The real question is, why is inflation allowed to happen again and again and again? To understand that, you have to go back to a time when inflation was considered a national disaster, not an economic policy. In the early 1900s, most major countries were tied to gold. Every banknote represented real metal locked inside a vault that kept money scarce, stable, and honest. Governments couldn't simply print money when they made mistakes. If a nation spent too much, it faced reality, raise taxes, or admit failure. Printing money was not an escape route, it was economic suicide. Inflation happened only in emergencies, usually during wars or total collapse. Then everything changed. The Great Depression shattered the old system. Prices didn't rise, they fell. Wages collapsed. Banks died. Businesses froze. People stopped spending because every dollar was becoming more valuable the longer they held it. Money was like ice, solid, frozen, unmoving. The system stopped breathing. Deflation wasn't just an economic problem, it was a death spiral. And when the world climbed out of that darkness, leaders learned a new truth. Inflation could save them. After World War II, nations were drowning in debt. Some owed more than their entire economies were worth. There was no way to pay it back honestly. So they didn't. Instead, they let inflation melt the value of their debt. What was worth $1 trillion yesterday was worth far less tomorrow. Nobody noticed. Nobody complained. And quietly, a new idea was born. Inflation wasn't a monster. It was a tool. Then came the moment that permanently rewired the global economy. 1971, when President Richard Nixon closed the gold window, the world's financial foundation quietly snapped. From that day forward, the dollar was no longer tied to gold. You couldn't exchange paper money for metal anymore, only for more paper. Most people didn't understand what had happened. Many still don't, but the truth is simple. Money stopped being a store of value and became a tool of policy. A weapon, a lever, a system built on belief instead of substance. For the first time in modern history, currency was limited only by confidence. Governments could create money out of nothing. Banks could multiply credit without restraint. Debt was no longer a burden, it was the engine. Economists began preaching a new gospel. As long as inflation stayed controlled, the system could expand forever. And a dangerous truth was discovered. The real winners were not savers, but borrowers. Inflation quietly turns logic upside down. Cash becomes poison. Debt becomes power. Look at a simple example. $1 million mortgage today can feel terrifying. But after 20 years of steady inflation, that same debt feels lighter and smaller. Meanwhile, the value of the house rises with every passing year. Inflation punishes the person who saves and rewards the one who owns. It destroys the poor and fattens the wealthy, not because of conspiracy, but because of arithmetic. When the currency loses value, real assets, land, property, businesses, stocks gain value. Inflation shrinks debt. Inflation multiplies capital. Inflation isn't an accident. It's a design. Economists don't say this on TV, but governments, central banks, and powerful industries all rely on inflation. Without it, the entire structure of modern finance collapses. Because the world runs on credit. Governments borrow millions every minute. Corporations survive on loans. Consumers live on mortgages, car payments, and credit cards. If money kept its value forever, every dollar would need to be paid back in full strength. That's impossible in a system addicted to borrowing. So the solution is simple. Make every dollar worth less every year. Quietly, slowly, legally. But that leads to the brutal question. Nobody asks, what happens to the average person? Wages almost never rise as fast as prices. The cost of living climbs faster than paychecks. People are told to work hard and save, but saving becomes a trap. You earn 3% interest while inflation steals 6%. Your money is shrinking, even when you think you're protecting it. Meanwhile, someone who borrows at 4% to buy real estate can see that property rise in value by 10%, 20%, even 50% over time. That profit isn't luck, it's math. Inflation pushes wealth upward. The people closest to the money, banks, governments, corporations, receive it first, while it still has full value. By the time the same money trickles down to a worker's paycheck, prices have already risen. This is known as the Cantillon effect, a 300-year-old observation that explains modern inequality better than anything else. The first receivers of money grow wealthier. The last receivers fall behind. By the 1980s and 1990s. Central banks discovered the perfect trick. Target a small, almost invisible inflation rate, 2% a year. Sounds harmless, sounds scientific, but a 2% yearly loss becomes a 50% loss every generation. A dollar turns into half a dollar while nobody notices. Grocery bills double. Housing costs explode. College becomes a luxury. The middle class slowly suffocates while the wealthy thrive, because the rich don't fear inflation, they own inflation. By the early 2000s, the system was running smoothly, at least for those at the top. Everyone was borrowing, everyone was spending, and inflation kept the machine warm and alive. But in 2008, the world finally saw what happens when the illusion slips. The global financial system nearly collapsed under its own weight. Banks had created oceans of bad debt. Credit froze. Markets crashed. Ordinary people lost homes and jobs. For a moment, the world stood on the edge of a financial blackout. This should have been the Great Reset, a chance to rebuild something honest. Instead, the most powerful lesson of modern economics was revealed. When the world is drowning, governments don't fix the system, they inflate it back to life. Central banks printed trillions of dollars, not to help citizens directly, but to rescue the institutions that caused the disaster. Money flooded into banks, financial markets, and corporate balance sheets. Stocks recovered, real estate boomed, asset prices soared, but wages remained flat. Ordinary people got lectures about personal responsibility, while billion-dollar funds got bailouts. This wasn't corruption. It was policy. Inflation through asset prices, quiet, invisible, profitable for those who already owned something, devastating for those who didn't. Then came 2020, a global pandemic. Borders closed, businesses died, supply chains broke. For the first time in history, governments injected money directly into households. And once again, the same story repeated itself with new faces. Money poured into the economy. Demand exploded. But because supplies were limited, prices shot through the roof. Groceries, gas, rent, cars, homes, everything became more expensive. And when the dust settled, something familiar had happened. The stock market hit record highs. Real estate became unreachable, and the gap between the rich and everyone else grew wider than ever. People blamed greedy corporations. People blamed shortages. People blamed politics. But the truth is simpler. Inflation doesn't create new winners. It magnifies the old ones. It rewards whoever already has leverage, assets, property, capital, debt. And it punishes whoever lives paycheck to paycheck, saving scraps in a system designed to swallow them. History has proven this again and again. In Weimar Germany, the middle class watched their savings evaporate while industrialists with real assets became gods. After World War II, Britain quietly inflated away its massive debt while pensioners saw their lifetime savings shrink into dust. In the 1970s, America suffered stagflation, and yet those who owned land, oil, or commodities made fortunes. And in the 2020s, the world's richest 1% gained trillions while ordinary families fought over rising rent and shrinking paychecks. Different centuries, different governments, same formula. Because inflation is not a glitch in modern capitalism. It is capitalism. It is the silent tax nobody votes on. It is the oxygen of a debt-driven world that must constantly grow, even if it crushes the people inside it. Central banks talk about fighting inflation, but their real goal isn't to eliminate it, only to control it. Zero inflation would destroy the machine. Deflation would shatter banks, overwhelm borrowers, and collapse entire nations, so the system keeps running forward, powered by a currency that loses value every year. Inflation doesn't just change the economy, it changes human behavior. It teaches us to spend faster, Invest recklessly, fear saving, and live for today. It rewards risk and punishes patience. The perfect psychological, designed for a world addicted to debt. Once you understand this, everything becomes clear. The rich don't love inflation because they are greedy. They love inflation because they are prepared. They own assets that rise. They hold debt that shrinks. They play a game where the rules quietly erase the past and reward those who already own the future. Meanwhile, ordinary people are told to save money in a system built to destroy savings. So the next time someone says, a little inflation is good for the economy, remember who it's good for. Not the worker saving for a home, not the retiree living on a fixed pension, but the ones who already own the homes, the land, the businesses, the stocks, and the power to shape the system. Inflation isn't a fire burning down the world. It's the oxygen feeding the flames. It keeps the engine of global finance running, even if it melts the wheels beneath the people who have to ride it. Because in the modern world, inflation isn't theft, it's strategy. And the only question left is simple. Are you the one losing value, or the one deciding what value means?